So let me ask you something. Are you an iPhone person or an Android person? It's a question that can, spark some surprisingly intense debates. We've all seen the memes, we've all heard the jokes, but is there actually any truth to it? Does that little device in your pocket really say something fundamental about who you are as a person? Well, today we're going to peel back all the marketing and the stereotypes and see what the science actually says. Let's dive in.
So let's just frame this whole debate. At its core, the question is pretty simple, right? Is your choice of phone a deep, meaningful reflection of your personality? Or is it just a preference that we, as a culture, have decided to load up with all this extra meaning?
I mean, these probably look familiar, right? On one side, for the iPhone, you've got the stylish, creative social butterfly who just wants things to work. And for Android, you've got the practical, tech-savvy person who loves to customize and wants control over everything. So be honest with yourself for a second. Do you see yourself on this chart? Do any of these labels actually feel right? Keep that thought because we're about to put it to the test. But before we get to the data, we really need to understand why we get so invested in these labels in the first place. I mean, how did a simple tool for making calls turn into a core piece of our identity? The journey is, well, it's pretty fascinating.
It's wild to think that back in the 90s, mobile phones were these clunky things mostly for business. Then, bam, 2007 happens. The iPhone arrives, Android follows just a year later, and the whole world changes. Suddenly, they weren't just phones. They were our cameras, our navigators, our music players, our connection to basically everything and everyone. So it's really no surprise that today, our phone feels less like a tool we own and more like, well, like an extension of ourselves.
Okay, so if these devices are so deeply personal, then the stereotypes have to have some truth to them, right? Well, this is where it gets really, really interesting. It's time to separate the cultural myths from the cold, hard data.
All right, let's take a look at extroversion, this idea that iPhone users are more outgoing and social. Now, some studies do find that, on average, they score a tiny bit higher. But just look at this chart. I mean, really look at it. The difference is so small, it's almost invisible. The reality is, the personalities of both groups almost completely overlap.
And guess what? It's the exact same story for other personality traits. Here we have honesty, humility, where Android users are supposed to score a little higher. But again, look at the bars. The difference is tiny. When you actually look at the numbers, the strong stereotypes we all hear just don't hold up.
And this quote from a huge research synthesis just sums it all up perfectly. Your phone doesn't determine who you are, it amplifies the preferences you already have. So think of it this way. If you're someone who already values seamless design and simplicity, you might naturally gravitate towards an iPhone. If you love to tinker and have control, well, Android is probably going to be your playground. The phone is a reflection of your priorities, not your actual soul.
So that raises a huge question, doesn't it? If the data shows such tiny, insignificant differences, why in the world do these powerful stereotypes even exist? What is going on in our heads?
Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is something called social identity theory. It's this core psychological idea that a big part of how we see ourselves comes from the groups we belong to. And in our world, those groups aren't just, sports teams or clubs, they can be consumer brands. Being Team Apple or Team Android becomes a real, tangible part of our identity.
And this identity gets reinforced all over the place. First, there's the ecosystem lock-in. Once you've bought all the apps and accessories, it's hard to switch. Then you've got this aspirational marketing constantly telling you what kind of cool, creative, or smart person uses which phone. And finally, it all becomes a very visible social cue, a quick mental shortcut we use to size people up, even if it's completely inaccurate.
And oh my gosh, there's no better, more perfect example of this than the whole blue bubble versus green bubble drama. It's a tiny technical detail in a messaging app, right? But it has been blown up into this huge social signal of who's in the in-group and who's the outsider, all based on the color of a text. It's kind of wild.
Okay, so maybe it just seems like a harmless rivalry. Some fun trash talk. But attaching all this meaning to our phones isn't always just fun and games. These stereotypes can actually have some real-world consequences.
For one, since high-end phones cost more, these stereotypes can accidentally start to map onto very real social divides around money and class. Second, as we just saw with the chat bubbles, it can create genuine friction and awkwardness, making it just a little bit harder for us to connect. And finally, it brings up a really big question.
What responsibility do these giant tech companies have to design products that bring us together, instead of creating these little digital tribes?
So we end with this question for you to think about. Is your phone really a window offering a clear, direct view into your soul? Or is it more of a mirror, simply reflecting back the priorities, the preferences, and maybe the social groups you've already chosen? The research seems pretty clear. It's much, much more of a mirror. Your phone doesn't define you, but it is one of the most visible ways you show the world what you value.